And today I would like to share with you my global experience. It's really interesting. Actually, I'm myself a product of globalization, born in Russia, right in Russia, and then spent quite a lot of time in the United States, in New Zealand, and recently in Sweden. So I would like to share with you some of the ideas about the research that I have done in all these countries, and also the experience that I observed by being the global citizen. I would like to first of all to stress that globalization is actually now a recognized phenomenon, and it's a phenomenon that was talked a lot about from the end of the 20th and beginnings of 20th century. And all people knowing about smart multi-phase globalization, about the pluses and also as well minuses. And usually in literature you can find the connection of globalization, first of all, with the economical globalization, it's market economy. Also it's political globalization with different cooperation and global exchange and like the EU, organizations like that, and many others, trade union organizations. Also it's cultural globalization, and then need for worldwide harmonization of the cultural export, first of all, the Western culture, and in my talk today I try to prove it, what does it mean. Also ideological globalization, we'll know about this, and I also try to stretch a little bit about this aspect, and also ecological, and that's actually my particular field, and I would like to share with you thoughts about ecological globalization. And also it's social, and I think we have to really talk about this and think about this quite a lot, because today we all share the consumerist culture, and it's usually defined as the homogenized mode of life based on the individualistic approach. So also it's we live in the consumerist culture of the production of the more and more goods. And for you, I just included my favorite images of the malls, of the Santa Claus culture, and actually now you can see in all airports and arriving already around the world, of modernization and also economical globalization with our Europe, and we all share it in this country. Also, I would like to stress about the roots of this globalization in the US. First of all, it's again developed with market economy. And it's appeared first in Europe in period of related to industrial revolution, of course, and then it came through the United Kingdom and United States. And formerly it was observed and organized the international market economy back in 1980s, and also a lot of roots and history. But in my talk, I only just stretch the kind of historical ideas behind the globalized world. Also, okay, yes, I will. So I would like to talk more about the landscapes and their roots. Why I was starting to have research on globalization, especially global urban landscapes, because coming from northern hemisphere, from Russia via United States to New Zealand, I realized that, of course, New Zealand is a slice of England. It's no surprise. It was a colonial UK for a long time, and but I saw all the pattern of all places, not only in New Zealand but in Australia and many other places, and returned to Russia in the 1980s. Also, I saw the same landscapes. So I started to be interested, and also my another background is in the history of landscape architecture. So I started digging to see what is behind it. So and I found that there are two main approaches that actually was used, and special roots for the global culture. It's an English landscape or English natural park is another word, or very often is associated with the picturesque approach. It's a late stage of the English landscape park. There's all these curvilinear lines, very extending lawns, a group of trees, and also it was in a sense at the beginning mimic of the English nature, but it was especially made nature. And the second was later in the Industrial Revolution, Dardanesque style. And if you can see, and I tried to prove in my research, that it's actually the most influential styles that have shaped the rest of our world and our global culture. First of all, Victorian Dardanesque is first of all, we're talking about exoticisms and eclecticisms. A lot of exotic plants arrived with the new species from different parts of the world. And also, it was the very Christian-based philosophy, belief on the man that is near God, and are related to the Garden of Eden, and are first we get many gardens in the Bible with all these plants that are supposed to be there. And for wealthy people at the beginning, it was a source of the agreeable domestic recreation. And the formal, for the poor people, it was beneficial to physical, mental, and spiritual well-being. And here I included two examples from Chatsworth Garden with all this topiary work, very typical for Victoriana in that time, and also its realization and later in one of the private garden in Christchurch, New Zealand, with all this color and exotic plants. Also, Victorian era was a triumph of the art and the horticulture skills over the nature, and we can read Loudon's work. It was straightforward. We should show our skillful nature of the man as the image of the God, and created that. And everybody knows this image of the Kew Botanical Gardens, one of the first torp flower beds that was created at that time, around 1870s. And this is one of the main features that actually was conquered the whole world for almost now 150 years. In the right, you can see the Victoriana in Australia, in Brisbane, in Roma Park, that was recently created. Also, British Empire created and produced all the symbols of the entire Western civilization that we're using right now as part of the global landscape. First of all, they produced the new model of the public park. As you know, public parks first appeared in England and then spread over Europe, and then to the places like America and Americas and other places around the world. And recently is now all this message and the structure of the public parks using all the way around the world. By the way, I would like to ask you questions. Can you recognize the slides that I put in the picture here? Can you tell me the countries? What about this? It's the motherland. So it's a Hyde Park in London. What about here? I think you can recognize it. Yes. What about here? Any clue? Yes. Shanghai. Yeah, but you see the similarity. What about this image? Dubai. Yes. But I think because the message, it's actually this similar framework and structure, and actually the messages, the most important, the philosophical messages, then it was created. Also, in the same time was created the old garden. First of all, layouts of the botanical gardens. It was a special display for the public of all this wonder of the world from all places, small corners of the world. And of course, it's not surprised it was developed in Great Britain, in the great empire. In Kew Botanical Garden was actually all the first and created all these layouts and actually attributes of botanical gardens, such as display of all these groups. Then you can actually walk around and display the special specimens and a group of plants. Of course, greenhouses was created in the Industrial Revolution with all this mass production of the glass. All this inner display and the plants in the fields, time to time, in the stage by stage, for example, poinsettia, that constitute the old botanical gardens by the early 20th century. And of course, all these nymphaeums and all these big Victoria Regia greenhouses were specially created, first of all in England, and then spread all over the places. This is the original Paxton image was his daughter staying on the Victoria Amazonica, and this is image from the Stockholm Botanical Gardens, actually was created not so far, long time ago. I'm sure you know that all these garden-related attributes, flower shows, actually also appeared in England and by the end of 19th, beginning of the 20th century, as a Chelsea flower show, and it is spread for all of the places. I only would like to show you a couple of them. I have a big collection recently, and it was very interesting in topic and origin of these flower shows. This is in Christchurch, that was all these flowers. This is also in Auckland. This is flower show, tulip flower show, Tulipiana in Ottawa, and this is very recent editions in Imperial Gardens of Russia, the new flower exhibition that actually used to be one of the judges for several years. I'm arguing that the main influential elements in the picturesque gardenesque landscapes that were accepted for the global landscapes, it were the lawn, flower beds, and rockery. And also, I can ask you the same question. Can you recognize the country that I put in the slides? How about this? Very difficult to say, but ideology is the same like was a picturesque gardeners. It's actually Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur. What about here? No, this is Shanghai in China. And the rockery, and this is Chatsworth, and this is actually nursery that propagated all this rockery in St. Petersburg, Russia. Very recent slide from last year, one of the nurseries. It's particular my interest because I have also very great interest in plant material, being a botanist as well. I realized that actually global pool of plants for the temperate as well as the tropical landscapes and commercial uses also was developed by the second part of the 19th century. Through the several stages of introducing the plants from the appropriate plants, chosen plants by the eyes of all these Western people, first of all from England. This was from Asia, special waves from China, the discovery of China, then later 19th century Japan, then all America, South America, for example, Australia, I love New Zealand, gave a lot of global pool plants, and of course tropical countries. And let's give that show you over in one of the gardens by the end of 19th century, 20th century in Washington, D.C. And the lower picture from Rarotonga, you can see all this pool of global plants in the period by that time. I had a very interesting research, and I have a publication just was recently out about all these questions of the forming of the global pool of plants. I compared the nursery in Seattle, in St. Petersburg, in Germany, some of the other countries. It was incredibly striking similarities of the chosen conifers and deciduous species for landscape design in plant nurseries around the world. And of course, there's now global exchange of the plant material, you can see all these slides from different nurseries and the plants are saying. It was really interesting. Seattle and St. Petersburg, believe me, they are in different climatic zones. But now, in our markets, we have all these plants that actually exist. And the same, of course, with the all the annual plants as well. And my particular interest about the global pool of the exotic plants for tropical landscapes. All these bougainvilleas, plumeria, hibiscus that came from different parts of the world created this essential foundation of this global pool of plants. And of course, palms. Palms is a special story. It was also have a very, very interesting interaction. What plants were chosen from all this global family of the palm plants? You know, one of the most important ones is a Canary palm. I'm sure you see it on many landscapes from Canary Islands. And it was chosen because it could grow in open ground in England. And now it's one of the most important palms from around the world everywhere, even in more. It's one of the most invasive plants in countries like Argentina and now in New Zealand after 150 years. Western tropical paradise leading to the homogenization of the urban tropical landscape. I told my students, if you would like to be practicing landscape architecture in tropical countries, no problem. Learn about 200, 300 plants, and you'll be all well in Caribbean, in Singapore, and many other places around the world, Rarotonga, and in many islands in Pacific and many other places. So we have a unified design language, and actually most important, it's very suppressed natural plant communities that are created in especially island environment, because it's also related to the island ecosystem effect than we're facing at the moment. This is my favorite image from Rarotonga, from this wonderful lagoon image that you can see in all advertising in TV at the moment. And you know, if you just look at as a botanist in this flora, it says only one native palm, as a coconut palm. That's it. And all 99% of others are exotic. And these happy people of Rarotongan, they're the happiest people in the earth, according to the survey, recently. And they are lay, traditional lay, they are using. You know what? There's no one native plant. Gardenia was introduced in 10th or 11th century from one, but there's maybe one kind of character of the native Rarotongan plants. So today we're moving with this international market economy. And actually, with all this very rich origin Victorian plant material, it was dramatically declined because of this mass production in nursery and commercializing of the market. So we have all the chosen plants that actually now, by the days, is declining. And I really like this image from Dubai. You see this poor petunia that plant exactly on the sand and irrigated. How sustainable it is. Or this lovely picture on here from St. Petersburg, my favorite place, with the begonias as a saguaro cactus. How would that be amazing for your garden? And related crocodiles, by the way, is the special hitchhike you can buy for your house in St. Petersburg. Or this lovely cabbage trees here, red cabbage tree you can find out. And you can see all around the world is actually endemic plants from New Zealand. Also, you're aware that many landscapes today are following the typical slogan of the globalization era to be tidy, pretty, and colorful. So today's European version of biota, this Western version of biota, can have a very, very simple formula. Picturesque and garden-esque aesthetics, this will be epitome of nature in the city. Now how we can see this, the nature in the city. This is lawns with flower beds. If you have it green and colorful, you have the nature in the city. Also, I really would like to connect these kind of issues of globalization and creating the special landscape to the political globalization. We're not only having transnational elite with connection to different international economic institutions, but we also have this kind of elite in our own profession. We have firms, and actually quite big firms, mostly rooted in the United States, in England, and other European countries. They actually created the images and practices from around the world, and also kind of responsible for creating the global landscape. I'm not really criticizing here, but I try to understand. And if you think about who is practicing in the landscape and the origin of these organizations, especially architecture, yes, it's mostly from Western countries, especially for the new market economy like China, Russia, or Emirates, or many other places around the world. So we have a responsibility for creating this panels from the global landscape architecture, and to see how we can create the different, more sustainable way. I include here two examples from my recent trip to China for the Landscape Ecology Conference, actually. We had a special trip to the Eco Town in China. And it was designed with together with Chinese and European and American firms, and also China Singaporean Tianjin Eco City in China. And they try to promote the energy, sustainable energy, design in areas. But for this example on the Kunming Eco Town in China, they moved about 12 surrounding villages. Just remove that and force people to come to this new Eco Town. How socially sustainable it is. They lost all their land and they're not having choice just to move to the town. And many other issues not related to the Eco Town philosophy. And another example, look at this particular slide. This is like a solar panels building, very sustainable, and that they have how many energy we save, like 50%. But look at this landscape here. It's incredibly high maintenance issue next to each other. Also, it's created a landscape. It's called a special word. It's called routine modernism of skyscrapers. It's a special word right now in the literature. And you know what? Because it's such a striking imagery force in the landscape, so now it's one of the most important visual symbols of the success and prosperity of market economy in landscapes. Why all people now try to reshape the city, including Tallinn? You can see it for the next to the old city, the new one. It's actually the symbol of prosperity of the market economy. It means you're doing really good by doing the business. And again, try to play the game with you. Can you tell me the countries when I make this slide? It's very interesting. What about this slide? This is the kind of prototypes of all this business success, and it's actually the first country ever started in Europe. It's right. What about here? Shanghai. Tricky one here. This is a city project in Moscow. And you know, Kremlin is just there. Here, everybody recognizes Singapore. What about here? Is Dubai, and here. This is actually Gold Coast in Australia. And even all the old world couldn't really resist to this new waves, and its own new business districts appeared in the places like Naples, for example, in Italy, and many other places in Europe. I don't include another. And that's actually now a more struggle. And coming from St. Petersburg, I can tell you also, even UNESCO heritage sites are really struggling on this globalization and success of the business. The recent one, I'm sure you know about, this Opta Center, that was actually should be created just opposite to the Smolny Cathedral. It's where we all visited in the landscape, but unfortunately the citizens of St. Petersburg and UNESCO won the battle. Also, why it's happening is why this offering of this similar familiar comfortable landscape with the buildings, all these picturesque gardens, public parks, and global plans that can actually attract international investments are so popular. Because it's again growing market economy, and if you're creating this kind of symbolic landscape in the sense of showing your Western, it really can be successful. And there's a lot of literature now about new waves of the globalization and landscape architecture in new economies like in China and in Russia and the Arab Emirates. And Hong Kong was one of the recent as well, very good article about this kind of processes in landscape architecture. And again, if I ask you the question where I took the slides, can you tell me? What about this? This is China. What about this larger picture with the private garden? This is Russia. Very, very kind of American-driven landscape. What about here? This is in China, and here, this is Arab Emirates. All this lawn created on the center. Also, when we have a unification of urban environment, we are going to this it's a landscape because we have it in everyday life. It's a global culture. And we have all this Western culture that actually created by the end of 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, and accepted by the end of the 20th century, beginning of the 21st century. You know all of them. It's mall culture, it's white Christmas, and white wedding. And I was really researching this question. This is the big one, sorry. This is the biggest mall of Arab Emirates, the Mall of Emirates. And this is artificial skiing slope created in this mall. And it's permanent temperature minus 4 degrees. And you know what? You can find the penguins and the white bear in the same place. And this for people to enjoy -4 with +40 outside. And not too many people know, and it's a really lovely picture of the Santa Claus running the dolphins in Hawaii. You know, this wonderful image of the Christmas in Hawaii with the deer here also somewhere. And also white wedding. White wedding, you know, white wedding came only by the Queen Victoria by the end of the 19th century, but the industry was created in America. Was all these attributes the same color of the dress, all these witnesses, bride, and all these flowers with their language. They have Victorian roots, but it's actually absolutely commercialized, culturally driven force. And as well is of, I don't tell about the McDonald's culture, everybody knows about this form as well. So we have also globalization ecological, an ecological one. And actually our modern landscape architecture is contributed to the ecological globalization. And it's linked to the climate change, to the problem of resources shortage and many others. And this is two examples from China, where we have a tidy environment with along the highways. It's, on one hand, it's very, very ecological against the pollution. On the other hand, it's really, really high maintenance. It's a lot of resources. And another my favorite examples from Arab Emirates, because I cannot really still withdraw to see all this poor petunia in the sand with plus 40 outside. And no water, no animal skin. It's also related to the water and air pollution, using the herbicides and pesticides in our maintenance. And coming from the southern hemisphere, especially from New Zealand, with a huge problem of invasive plants. It is spread of invasive plants from all this pool of tropical and subtropical plants and arrive in the era of globalization to all the southern hemisphere countries. And now it's my favorite topic. I've been researching lawns for years, now about 20 years at the moment. So I call it evil of global urban landscapes. Even the love lawns. So there are a lot of pluses, and I'm not really going to convince you, don't use the lawn. I like trying to also to find as a researcher why it's evil part of the globalization. You know, we live in the era of lawns because thanks to Capability Brown, who created us this approach, and actually related to the native English landscape, that's all is doing really well, it's actually all native plants from there. About 50% in private gardens and 70 to 85%, depending on the hemisphere, in public parks, is actually covered by lawns. And it's now seen as a very powerful symbol of the Western culture and control over the nature. This upper slide, I'm not going to play the games. It's China, and law is from the South Africa in Potchefstroom, and plants are almost the same. So our sacred Western lawn is the most significant ecologically extravagant elements of our cities. Are our lawns green? Actually, I ask the questions because with all this high resource use, contribution to even pollution and loss of biodiversity is actually quite questionable. And now I would like to share you a really latest data that came from America about their lawn. And you know, now North Americans spend about 10 billion annually on lawns, rating and their dedication. So 23 of the entire urban land cover and dedicated to lawns. And by the end of the 20th century, North America's lawn covered 300,000 square kilometers and is area twice to the size of the state of New England. And the cost in tools, water, fertilizers, and are kept for the individual homeowners is about $250 per year for the lawn care. It's a big numbers. We have in America more than 14,000 golf courses and 60 million kilograms of pesticides. I love this number. It's really amazing. And 1.5 trillion liters of municipal water in irrigated on the grass. So is conventional lawn really good for our cities? The question is. Of course, we can argue it's very important functional element and design element. We can live without this. But what is shown in the even studies in California, that actually the greenhouse gas emissions from the fertilizer production when we're using in our lawn at the moment, 4 times greater than the amount of carbon stored by the ornamental grass and parks. And emissions include the NO2 released to soil after the fertilizers, and this particular NO2 is a greenhouse gas that's 300 times more powerful than our CO2. And the Earth's most problematic climate form. So we did research in biodiversity in 327 lawns in Christchurch, New Zealand, within the program called Low Impact Urban Design and Development Program. And all the lawns were dominated by the exotic herbaceous plants of Eurasian and North American origin. And now we continue to do it in South and Northern Hemisphere, and we can see incredibly striking similarities in these lawns. It's an example from South Africa, from Cape Town. You can recognize it because of the Table Mountain. And from the Vancouver, and the plants will be almost the same. And structure and composition, and many other features. So as the effect of globalization, I would like to summarize very briefly. So it's lead to unification of our environment. Hope I convince you this is true, you know that. And also unsustainable development in many cases, especially was used in a modern way of using lawns. And also suppress of local biodiversity. We're using the same plants and very rare and native plants as well. And that's why it's leading to the crisis of identity. So what is the solution? Okay, we know that we live in very urbanized, very unified, very global world. So how we can do something different? How we actually do in the climate change issues and with pollution and everything else with a more sustainable way. So there are different solutions at the moment and decisions from different countries. It's different law objective in design development, law design development, sustainable ecological design in many other places. I'm sure you know all these examples. This example from the Copenhagen and Malmö in Sweden, as well as from Seattle in Auckland, who is doing with all this integrated water management, with the green roofs, swales, rain gardens, and there are detention ponds, and try to filter the water pollution as well. And now I would like to share with the summary they have done working with the urban biodiversity. And I see it's a very important tool for creating all these sustainable urban landscapes and make them ecologically and culturally identical, because it's very important to know the flora of the place you live and how we can use this actually incredible, important source of nature for our design inspiration. So I summarize the Northern Hemisphere approach in Europe and Southern Hemisphere. It's actually very interesting. In Northern Hemisphere, it's much easier to work with urban biodiversity design. We can just reinforce nature that already existed. We have a reintroduction policy. We can design with natural processes. We can free them as many as possible for just increasing biodiversity. We can leave nature alone if we wish to, and it will be very sustainable. We can have a very relaxed approach of the combination of native and non-native species, what we are doing in our design in the Northern Hemisphere. And actually, it's work in UK is not so harmful compared to the Southern Hemisphere. When they can't use all this nice, fancy approach that we created in the Northern Hemisphere, we can leading it, because it's all suppressed by the weeds when we actually created by our activity in last century. So this is only going to the special approach like a design with native flora and fauna. So we have an even special term, native biodiversity, not just biodiversity, design with using of the indigenous plants. So also the people are now looking for the inspiration in native landscape, and I was really pleased to hear Mary's presentation about this desert environment, how they try to inspire the native plant communities and make it more visible. Because in identity crisis can be visual used as inspiration for creating and mimic the nature of plant communities. This is a different example from New Zealand with tussock grass that is used for one of the private houses with a special viewing platform. Also a xerophyte landscape in Arizona, and recently created a botanical garden in Washington, D.C., display of the mid-Atlantic nature, how you can design in your own private and public garden. Also, approaches to design with urban biodiversity can be seen in different levels, starting from very, very big, used by planners and designers, as green bridges, green corridors, green infrastructure, to the more intermediate scale, to the green livable streets, to a very fine scale of the design with biotopes or habitat, and show how the whole nature can be visible in the landscape. I just summarize what we have around the world, and you can see all these dots, and all these new approaches, innovative approaches to urban biodiversity. And you can see the map, you can see actually there are not too many places around the world that actually use this practice. You know how many still big white spots of the urban biodiversity trends around the world. And actually, it mostly came from, again, English-speaking countries and from European countries. And now we have some examples from China, China and Japan, but it's also driven from the European and North American examples. I would like to show you different recent trends. This example on the right with reintroducing and redesign the waterways, for example, and reconstruct the lost biodiversity. This is our latest design. We designed within our project, Law Impact Urban Design Development, special demonstration gardens in Christchurch Botanical Gardens. We have no lawns, only native plants, but using formal, shady, and grass gardens. And this is from Argentina, new example of going and using native plants in Argentina in one of the golf courses. Also, it's very interesting tendencies in United States with urban biodiversity. First of all, it's directly related to the recent economical crisis, with derelict lands, loss of jobs, and everything else. They try to think about the returning to the productive landscapes, to urban agriculture. So this is now the new slogan called eatable landscapes. And I really recommend you to read a very recent book that just came out. It's called Eatable Lawn, How to Redesign and How to Eat the Lawn. Actually, American literature has a lot about redesigning the lawns. They have a whole pile of the books. If you're interested, I can recommend it to you. But of course, they are actually the most holder of the lawn landscapes. So there's really interesting tendency, and it's a main way of replacing all this amount of lawns for the more eatable landscape and make it more sustainable and productive. And again, it's related to the environmental crisis, and they really try to use this approach to create all these serif landscapes, or they're using the right relevant plants. I really like this quote from one of the books. The lawn is a green desert. How like this? It's very amazing. So, and we're eatable, medicinal, beautiful, and nice smelling by adding low-growing aromatic herbs and flowers. And look at the wonderful dandelion. They actually propagated as a wonderful source of the food. Also, the approach is actually used in some of the American landscapes. First of all this prairie theme that came from even 19th century, created prairie gardens, returning prairie plants. And in wonderful Millennium Park that was created in Chicago, there are a lot of references of using all these native plants and also native landscapes of marshy origin, actually to inspiration for the only very modernistic design. Also, I would like to include this one of the most famous examples from China, this design with nature, by the Kongjin Yu, who is working a lot in this wetland landscape. They try to celebrate and reconstruct the nature and using as a major driven force of the design in landscape architecture. Also, Tokyo in Japan, they recently done the design of the major river by recreating all these reed marshlands along the river as possible solution for the water pollution cleansing, and also using it as a major design element as well as educational element. And also I summarized the European examples of the biodiversity design in Europe. It's actually quite a lot of them. And I show you different examples of these approaches. Of course, I could miss something because many other countries also follow these examples. But if you have a new and you more about the existence in your own countries, I would really appreciate to have these examples also in our file. First of all, in Great Britain, it was an approach that followed Gardeners, who was wild garden. He started to think about this more plants and places behave like native and do need more special technique of the growing in English climate, kind of ecological thinking in the beginning. And about the turning on the century is a new movement called Going Wild, Leave Nature Alone, and even in the exhibition of a few botanical gardens, there are a special section every year that you can demonstrate how you can leave your lawn alone, how you leave the nature alone, and make it more sustainable. Also, it's pictorial meadows, very big approach and created in University of Sheffield by a group of designers who are working a lot with all these annual perennial mixtures who can substitute some of the lawn areas in the real neighborhoods. So also they are really working with some of the prairie plants in English landscape that can actually be a source of nectar and pollen for insects and birds. And again, it's more relaxed approach compared to the southern hemisphere because they are not really naturalized to bed compared to the southern hemisphere countries. Also, the Netherlands had a very interesting approach of the back to the even beginning of the 20th century in Amsterdam Bush Plan to use all these native plant communities inspiration for Dutch planting design. And in Amsterdam Bush was used, and also wildlife flowers as propagate and back into the oldest shady landscape in the parks and gardens. Also in Germany and Switzerland, it's very interesting approach called go spontaneously, go wild, but actually it was suppressed a little bit because of the design was native in 1930s was associated with the National Socialist ideology, and it was actually not allowed to talk about this if you would like to have a native gardens in your native plants in your garden. But recently, by the turn of the 21st century, it was a spontaneous vegetation, and you can see all this design that are not acceptable for many, many countries like this. And I asked, why are you just doing that? And this is spontaneous vegetation. It's a new psychology. So this is plant community processes, respect, and design with a special quality of plant material. Also, they try to increase and use small, even very tiny biome, teach the places like where you see that roundabout to increase and integrate nature in the design. Why? Because they don't have it nature anymore. In Germany, many other places, it's true. We have a very, very few amount of nature in Central Europe, especially, and in some of the Western European countries. So I was really amazed in Switzerland with this spontaneous vegetation approach and use in different biotopes. Also in Sweden, that I'm living right now, it's a lot of movement with the nature schemes in substitute with kind of always annual, very expensive and very resource-driven and very not sustainable planting schemes to the more perennial, more sustainable, and more beautiful, more related to the native landscape. They even pick up the pictorial methods from UK and try to incorporate it in the Swedish landscape, and actually it's working. So it's art and first of all economical, and economy is really important, and also a long flowering period as well, and high biodiversity value. This is actually one of the very, very driven force for many of our planting schemes at the moment for landscape architecture. And again, in the climate change, we actually have to think, and it will be more and more dry summers, like they even experience, even in Sweden, there's a lot of water cleaning. Now it's more and more dry summers, we have to think of changing our altitude. And so this is most interesting one. This is very, very fresh. It's designed for real biodiversity in Europe, not only my lovely plant material, but using the complex ecosystem approach. Designed with plants and actually attracting insects, invertebrates, and birds. And the recent what they did, it's gardens for, sorry, it's not coming out. It's what I'm showing here, it's a garden for lizards, the special lizard garden. So they designed on one of the railways next to the new complex all these blocks, whereas very rare species of lizard leaves. And they explain it in the old neighborhoods park as a part of the park approach, is a park for lizards. The same park they made actually in Auckland, New Zealand, also trying to integrate the biodiversity approach. So they incorporate beeves next to plantings, and this is lizard garden. And I'd like to show you all these tendencies in Europe to use each small biotope sustainability approach in the landscape. This is not a weed. This is specially designed landscape in Switzerland for these lizards. And green roofs with just native grass. Also, by the end, I would like to conclude with the new tendencies in design in urban biodiversity with global-wide. What kind of approach try to use? First of all, it's a whole integration of the concept. It's a part of the broader development plan, like master plan, for example. And we're more and more talking about the integrated green infrastructure. This is an example from one of the regions in St. Petersburg of the green infrastructure plan. It's called landscape scenario. And then how it's actually implemented in the intermediate scale, in residential green areas, in public parks, to the very fine scale of urban biotopes. Some of the green roofs, for example, and living streets, edible gardens, and stuff like that. And I would like to just point, this is the first and the only green roof at the moment in St. Petersburg, made by the people in the 9th floor of the average building, by the extra pension. They just would like to grow food there. And it's now the major ecological destination for the international conferences. In Sweden now we're working with the approach of the integration of these ways of the sustainable resources framework to create really resilient city land. Not only urban but suburban environment, because it's also part of the approach. It is based on the National Habitat Agenda, and you can see all the 7 lovely resources that can be integrated to create a really sustainable city land. If you're interested in this approach, I have a publication I can refer you as well. And even we try to have now new research on lawns, my favorite one. We applied for the grant, trying to actually to see what is the lawn as a phenomenon. Not to say like an evil thing. Why so? How we can improve it? What a way to do it more sustainable. Also using is an integrated sustainable approach. So in the end of the presentation, I would like to actually share with you my thoughts. So Western countries who was actually lead to create this contribution to the globalization of the urban landscapes also experienced economical, ecological, and cultural and identity crisis, and try to search for all these sustainable solutions. And now we are working to try to find the new design directions, respecting gender equality and any other slogans when we use it for identity of place. And I think it's our mission to create a special democratic vision for that demonstrates sustainable and national identity. This is mission of the Western cultures, and it's really happening. You can see from the maps, it's all driven from the Western civilizations. So we have to be champions for the right ecological scenarios, for the global pool plans, for example, or solutions that people actually buy in many new developing economies. And this is a very good example of this in action. This is Waitangi Park, just in the middle of Wellington, the capital of New Zealand, with all this integrated water management, sustainable design solution as a major driven form of the design in Waitangi Park. Or this neighborhood from Myanmar with its average retrofitting policy that actually use all these natural sustainable way approaches. And I created a new word. I don't know, I'd like to share with you, and you should critique me. I tried to find a way how to create a new ecological style. I call it biodiversity. I don't know if it's right, but we have to think about something new that can actually be in the market in the way of the global approach. So it should be like a balance of these sustainable design approaches, like a lawn before and flower beds and all this rockery that we use all over the place, to demonstrate how we can use these new landscapes and created landscapes. New static language we can use. I don't say it's easy, it's very difficult, and we only started to do it. How all this new style will look like, how it might look like, we actually don't know. It's a lot of work to do. So I would like to just highlight the way we try to do it, how to adapt this traditional garden approach to biodiversity strategy. So probably it's important to introduce native plants to classical picturesque garden features. But we can't rid of this. It's now in the people's mind. But we can modify them. We can make it more sustainable. But again, it's related to native phytoxeric plants and raw gardens. Image the same, but plants will be different. It's a foundation the same, but ecological palette will be different. Ground covers can be easily substituted to lawns. Some of them are really even cheaper. This is example from our demonstration garden. We have some of the native New Zealand plants instead of lawns. And this is the Gold Wild approach in the UK in Kew Botanical Garden demonstration as well. Also, woodlands with the understory instead of the tidy capability, brown the groves and groups, we can see everything. This can be more sustainable as well and make more financially capable as well. Also, I'm talking about integrated biodiversity landscape. What kind of diversity we attract in private garden? Do we need insects? We would like to attract butterfly, but not mosquitoes in northern hemisphere climate. We have invertebrates. Lizard for New Zealand is fine, in Switzerland as well, but not snakes for Arizona. So it's going to be very adaptable on that. And also birds, but not introduced birds for sure in New Zealand. They hated all with our European introduced birds because they compete with native fauna. Also, maybe squirrels, but not squirrels actually in the United States because it's actually not really good for them, but it's very good for Europe. Not deer, of course, in any landscape, because I remember in America we're designing how not attractive deer, what kind of deer-resistant plants to use in our gardens. It's also a biodiversity issue. And also design that should address all these issues should be actually thought and created. And management and maintenance connection with sustainability, this is kind of major driving force, in my opinion, in this new integrated biodiversity landscape. So in the end, another directions for the more ecologically global paradigm is the history and current landscape market. It's education, TV programs and popular press and garden magazines, flower and garden shows. This is example from LSE flower show to demonstrate the rain gardens in New Zealand. School programs, demonstration gardens in botanical gardens, and importance of the economical research benefits. If we don't prove that it will be economically important, we'll never win the battle. It should be proven from economical point of view. And direct industry market, what we are growing, actually we should do that. And that's one of the points to win the battles towards the sustainable design. So thank you so much for your attention. I am ready for your questions. And by the end, I would like to tell you that I just recently published the book, just 1 month ago. And all these materials I included in my presentations is here.